Hey everyone. When we talk about threats to Israel, existential threats to Israel, traditionally we talk about Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas. These are the threats. Israel's been degrading those threats, and we're all justifiably, encouraged by the progress that's been made. Although there's unfinished business, but the greatest unfinished business, and what I believe is the greatest existential threat to Israel, is not anymore coming from those enemies, which are clearly defined as enemies, and Israel has been dealing with them, but rather it comes from terrorism coming out of the Arab community, the Palestinian community in Judea and Samaria. Judea and Samaria is often referred to by many people, by most people, as the West Bank. Just to put that to bed, that is a made-up term made up by the Jordanians in the 1950s to sever the area of Judea and Samaria from its original Jewish roots. So we use the term Judea and Samaria. But let's get right into the headlines so you have a sense of what is going on here, because this is a very seriously escalating situation. All the headlines I'm showing you are from the last week and a half or so. So we'll start by going back to a week and a half ago. 2 arrested on suspicion of starting devastating Gilad Farm fire. The fire damaged dozens of structures and vehicles and led to the injury of several people, including 2 firefighters. And here's some of the damage in the picture at this Jewish farm in Samaria. 2 Palestinians were arrested in a joint operation by the Israeli police, Border Patrol, and IDF on Monday. That's last Monday, a week ago, on suspicion of having ignited the fire at the Gilad Farm in Samaria on Saturday. The fire damaged dozens of structures and vehicles and injured several people, including 2 firefighters. Army radio noted that the 2 suspects were alleged to have thrown a cigarette out of the window of their vehicle while driving on Highway 55, and that there was no evidence or direct suspicion of the incident being an intentional case of arson. Although it's later been revealed that they kind of pulled up there and threw their lit cigarette butts right at the edge of this field. The community thanks the security forces and the police for the rapid action that led to the arrest, the Gilad Farm committee stated. We demand that the law enforcement authorities fully investigate, act decisively, and impose the most severe penalties provided for by law on those responsible for this criminal act. This is terrorism, and this incident should be treated as terrorism. That's what they said. And that's pretty much the story. What they don't tell you in this article is that the 2 men who were arrested were actually people who were members of the Palestinian Authority security services. More on that later in the video. And then we have this headline from a few days after that one. Israeli man seriously wounded in West Bank terror stabbing, 2 Palestinian attackers killed. According to the police, the stabbing victim was attempting to put out a fire which had been set by Palestinian residents of a nearby village. You seeing the trend? A 51-year-old Israeli, Itamar Cohen, was seriously wounded in a stabbing attack near the West Bank settlement of Elon Moreh on Thursday morning. That's just this past Thursday. The man was attacked at the Derech Avraham farm by 2 Palestinian attackers who were killed by Israeli forces at the scene. He was evacuated via helicopter for further medical treatment at a hospital. According to the Israeli police, the stabbing victim was stabbed in the chest after attempting to put out a fire which had been set by Palestinian residents of Beit Furik, a nearby village. IDF and police have cordoned off the village of Beit Furik, and an Israel Fire and Rescue Services investigator examined the site and determined the fire had been deliberately set. We are repeatedly witnessing arson and attempted attacks, Samaria Regional Council head Yossi Dagan said following the attack. And then we have this incident that just took place the other day. IDF kills terrorist who fatally shot 2 Israelis, wounded 3 others in the West Bank. 2 Israelis, including an IDF officer, were killed and several others were lightly to seriously wounded in a terror shooting near Gilad Farm. That's the one that was burnt the previous week, a settlement located southwest of Nablus in the northern West Bank on Friday morning. According to the IDF, a group of Israeli civilians had illegally crossed into Palestinian Authority-controlled territory while hiking in the area. The military said Palestinians confronted the group and began throwing rocks before one of them opened fire. The IDF said troops and other security forces rushed to the scene where they exchanged fire with the suspected attackers. The Palestinian Authority's health ministry said at least 4 Palestinians were killed and 4 others were wounded, including 3 in critical condition. A different account was provided by Essam Saifi, a local Fatah leader from the area, who told Reuters that about 25 to 30 Israeli settlers initially entered the area, attacked residents, and attempted to break into homes. According to Saifi, local residents came out to confront them, at which point the settlers opened fire. Saifi said the Israelis returned about half an hour later and attacked the western part of the town, wounding a miner. The ensuing chaos was followed by the arrival of Israeli forces who, together with the settlers, opened fire, he told Reuters. There's Benayahu Melet. He was killed. He was a member of Gilad Farm's emergency response team. The murdered Israeli, 32-year-old Benayahu Melet, a member of Gilad Farm's emergency response squad, who was killed after attempting to aid hikers under assault by Palestinians. He leaves behind a wife and two daughters, aged 13 and 12. The other was identified as 27-year-old Major Yuval Ezra, an artillery battery commander. The IDF seized and returned the stolen weapon. The terrorists stole a weapon from one of the emergency response people who was there. He attacked him. He grabbed the weapon. He took it, and then he shot. The IDF seized returned the stolen weapon after killing the terrorist. The hike left Mount Bracha in the early morning when a group of approximately 60 hikers, including 2 guards armed with rifles and several others with pistols, set off. A member of the group told Walla, that's a news agency in Israel. On the way, we stopped at a spring close to Sela Ridge around 7:05 a.m. The first incident occurred when several Arabs from the village began trying to get us to leave by throwing rocks and attacking us with clubs. One of the hikers was injured in the face. We retreated and began walking towards Gilad Farm. At 8:05, a second clash occurred. Dozens of Arabs from the village began throwing stones at us. Arabs began surrounding the group from 3 sides, and at this point, 2 of the armed Israelis opened fire in self-defense. The Arabs continued to advance, surrounded the group, which was trying to descend the mountain. At this point, the number of Arabs in the area had reached hundreds. A few minutes later, a military jeep arrived on the scene. 2 minutes later, 2 members of Gilad Farm's emergency response squad arrived. They tried to repel the Arab crowd by firing a few shots in the air, but to no avail, the witness said. Unarmed civilians also tried to help defend the group, but soldiers pushed them back. During the rush, one of the Arabs, a sheikh from the village, grabbed the gun of one of the emergency response squad members and fired. Magen David Adom paramedics responded to the scene to treat the wounded. We treated a 25-year-old man who suffered a gunshot wound to his upper body but remained conscious. We provided him with medical treatment and evacuated him by military helicopter to the hospital. Later, I assisted an IDF medical team. Together, we provided medical treatment to a critically wounded, unconscious man who suffered gunshot wounds to his body. After prolonged resuscitation efforts, we were forced to declare him dead. Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Katz, and IDF Chief of Staff Zamir held a discussion on ways to respond to the attack, the Prime Minister's office confirmed on Friday. We will act strongly against terrorists and their proxies, and we will not allow terrorism in Judea and Samaria to raise its head, Netanyahu said. Well, it is raising its head. Netanyahu and Katz issued a statement on Friday afternoon, issuing 5 orders. 5 orders. Firstly, to demolish the house of the terrorist responsible for the shooting near Tel Village that killed Melet. Second, to take strong counterterrorism steps in the villages that are hotbeds of terror, including by collecting weapons, revoking work permits, and more. Third, by reinforcing IDF deployment throughout the West Bank. Fourth, by establishing checkpoints. And fifth, by accelerating the regulation of farms and establishing new farms. Way to go. Netanyahu and Katz emphasized that security forces, including the IDF, must be allowed to act freely and with full force against terrorism, and to refrain from any action that could harm their activities or divert them from their central mission of protecting Israeli citizens and defeating terrorism. Because they tend to be timid out there. They don't want to cause incidents. They always wait too long. They tend to wait until an incident is already past the point of no return to take action. So they're calling for them to have more freedom of activity. The incident follows 2 stabbing attacks on Thursday, which I mentioned one of them here. We had this stabbing attack up here, right? But there were 2 stabbing attacks on Thursday, thereby marking the 3rd terror attack in the West Bank within a 24-hour period. As such, Zamir held a situational assessment, that's the chief of staff, with IDF Central Command Chief Bluth and Operations Director Chief Major General Cohen. Zamir ordered the mobilization of IDF reinforcements to help secure the area and prevent copycat and terror attacks. This includes a company from the Nachal Brigade's Reconnaissance Battalion, 2 companies from the General Staff's Infantry Regiment, and 2 companies from the IDF Commando Training School. 2 other battalions have been added to the regional patrols over the past 2 weeks, and a commando company was also added last weekend. According to military officials, the attacks came after a tense period marked by a high volume of security warnings. At the same time, a series of fires that burned large swaths of land intensified friction between Israelis and Palestinians in the West Bank, particularly around the farming outpost, meaning that fire I opened the video with was not an isolated incident. There's been a rash of these fires. The IDF is now concerned that additional attacks targeting Israeli soldiers and civilians could follow. At the same time, footage published Friday showed a large group of settlers, many of them masked, running towards the village of Jit. The incident occurred only hours after the attack at Gilad Farm in the West Bank. Tensions are running high, folks. Additionally, Walla has learned that a broad operational campaign is expected to begin across all regional brigades in the coming hours. The activity will focus on arresting wanted suspects and individuals sought for questioning, as well as conducting operations in known friction points. The main effort will center on the city of Nablus and the wider Samaria region. Okay. And this one, I'm just going to read the headline. I'm not even going to bother with the article because the headline tells us everything. The rest of it's just a bunch of statements by politicians. After third attack in 24 hours, leaders call on IDF to respond to West Bank terror with iron fist. And then we have this headline, which is more recent. It's from 2 days ago. IDF arrests over 70 terror suspects in West Bank operation following deadly shootings. So that's what we were reading about just before. More than 70 terror suspects from the West Bank were arrested Saturday following overnight operations, according to an IDF statement. The wide-scale operation comes after 2 Israelis, including an IDF officer, were killed and several others were lightly to seriously wounded in a terror shooting on Friday. That's what we read about. Prime Minister Netanyahu ordered a sweeping crackdown. And yeah, that's it for this one. Now, I want to put all this in a larger context, which is we're seeing a clear escalation in Judea and Samaria. We're seeing these arson attacks that are now popping up all over the place, and other attacks, stabbings. This is a real escalation. It's becoming a massive issue. And it's a tough situation. Unlike Gaza, certainly unlike Lebanon, you have Israeli population, significant Israeli population intermingled with the Arab population here. But you also have a bigger picture problem, which is that the Palestinian Authority is actually a very dangerous enemy of Israel. For a long time, the prevailing myth is that they cooperate with Israel. They also fight Hamas. This is all propaganda. There's no ideological difference between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. There's only a difference in tactics. Hamas believes in all-out war and saying things plainly. Palestinian Authority believes in doing things more surreptitiously and with and a gradual takeover of Israel. Their cooperation with the Israeli security forces is it's not cosmetic, but it's basically used selectively to serve their own interests. They have no problem arresting Hamas guys who are their internal political rivals. But when it comes to terrorism from their own ranks, that's they don't do anything about it. But the most dangerous thing is what the Palestinian Authority military force has become, because eventually there's going to be a confrontation between the IDF and the Palestinian Authority forces. And there was an article that was published a few weeks ago by the Jerusalem Center for Foreign Affairs, the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, and it was written by Reserve Lieutenant Colonel Maurice Hirsch. The PA's massive army threatens millions of Israelis within just 22 kilometers. I encourage you to go look for this article on the jcfa.org website. And it's a very long article. I'm just going to jump to the summary conclusions and recommendations all the way at the end of it. The data presented in this study presents a clear picture of the total collapse of Israeli security oversight over the Palestinian Authority. What was defined in the Oslo Accords as a limited police force was supposed to be 30,000 personnel at most for the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, has become a military monster currently numbering approximately 70,000 armed personnel. That's in the Judea and Samaria alone, in excess of 133% over the overall original force structure, and more than 50,000 armed personnel in Judea and Samaria alone, over 400% larger than the 12,000 policemen agreed upon for Judea and Samaria. Okay? Meaning that in the original peace accords, in the Oslo Accords, in the accords that produced the Palestinian Authority, there are rules for how large their police force is allowed to be, what weapons they're allowed to have, etc. And they're only supposed to have 12,000 policemen for Judea and Samaria, and they have more than 50,000 armed personnel. In the field of armament as well, reality is far removed from the agreements. Instead of 4,000 rifles in Judea and Samaria, the apparatuses, meaning the Palestinian Authority security apparatuses, now possess tens of thousands of weapons, armored vehicles, heavy military means, including documented RPGs and shoulder-fired missiles. This is not what police forces need, okay? Intended for urban warfare and combat against a regular army, not civilian policing missions. Who's the enemy they're preparing for? Jordan? Who? Who are they preparing for? They're preparing for Israel. As in the past, the terror army built by the PA is destined to turn its weapons against Israeli citizens. Due to its nature, size, and capabilities of this force, a northward, westward, and southward invasion by this terror army will endanger millions of citizens. The scale of destruction and killing within communities inside the Green Line could be significantly greater, even in comparison to the horrors of the October 7th massacre. As we learned painfully from the events of October 7th, reassuring statements by security officials and optimistic intelligence assessments guarantee nothing. A basic rule in both counterterrorism and warfare is that the enemy places special emphasis on the element of surprise, and no attack can be openly prevented. In other words, there is this military force that has been built up and trained as soldiers, and they have serious equipment, and it's a real force. And they're not training for no reason. They're not getting this equipment for no reason. And there's no other enemy on the horizon. They are preparing to attack Israel. And we need to be on top of this. Operational conclusions: failure of Israeli oversight. The fact that Israeli security agencies are unable or unwilling to provide data on the quantity of weapons approved for transfer to the PA indicates a loss of control and a policy of deliberate eyes wide shut, meaning turning a blind eye. Number two, the security coordination conception. Israel is captive to the conception that strengthening the Palestinian Authority security apparatuses serves Israeli interests in fighting Hamas. In practice, the apparatuses serve as a hothouse for terrorists, as evidenced by 12% of security prisoners originating from their ranks. Let me say that again. 12% of people who are arrested for terrorism, for terrorist activities, are actually part of the Palestinian Authority security services. Their own police officers are arrested as terrorists, frequently 12% of them, more than 1 in 10. And they train for the reversals of rifles scenario, a combined attack on central Israel and communities in Judea and Samaria. Reversal of rifles, hipuch kanim in Hebrew, is the name that is given to the scenario that we know is very possible, very likely, that at some point the Palestinian Authority is going to turn those weapons on Israel. A 22-kilometer, 13.67 mile threat, the tiny distance between Israel's population centers, its main population centers, the Tel Aviv area, etc., on the coast, and the bases of the Palestinian Authority terror army, turns any potential flare-up into an immediate existential threat to millions of Israeli citizens on a scale and lethality exceeding that of the October 7th massacre. Recommendations to decision makers. Given the severity of the threat, the Israeli government must adopt a strategy of dismantling and demilitarization instead of containment and arming. And when you read his Hirsch's recommendations, you realize how unrealistic it is and how dangerous the situation is. Here we go. Number one, immediate neutralization of offensive armament. Halt all approvals for the transfer of weapons, ammunition, or armored vehicles to the PA. Demand the immediate return of any armament exceeding Oslo limits, such as heavy machine guns, RPGs, and explosive devices. Could you imagine if Israel demanded, if they took out the Oslo Accords and said, hey, you're only allowed to have 12,000 police officers, fire everybody, give us back their weapons. You're not allowed to have RPGs, give those to us. How do you think that would go? Reduction of personnel, condition all economic or civilian aid to the PA on reducing the size of the security apparatus to the original agreed level of 12,000 for Judea and Samaria. Oversight and transparency, establish an independent Israeli oversight mechanism, not through the PA, for surprise inspections of weapons depots and training bases. Publicly disclose to the Israeli public and the Knesset all historical data regarding approvals for weapons transfers to the PA. Closure of terror army training bases. Demand the PA immediately close all facilities, training bases, or institutions whose purpose is to provide military training. They shouldn't have military training bases. Change in defense concept in Judea and Samaria and seam line, meaning the border. Prepare the IDF operationally for the reversal of rifles scenario, not as a theoretical concern, but as a central threat, meaning train for it. Construct physical barriers and add significant forces along the seam line under the assumption that on the day of reckoning, the Palestinian Authority apparatuses will be the first enemy to open fire. They will start it. In other words, treat this as a real enemy with a real scenario that we need to train for. Stop turning a blind eye. Cessation of foreign funding. On the one hand, issue a firm diplomatic demand to the United States and the European Union to condition the training they fund and conduct for PA security forces on the PA reducing the size of these forces. The United States pays for the training of these guys. Understand that. So condition it on reducing the size of the forces to the level agreed upon in the Oslo Accords. On the other hand, pursue legal action and full severity of punishment against any PA security personnel undergoing military training abroad, including in Pakistan. Because in the article, he lays out that a bunch of the senior officers in the Palestinian Authority have been trained on military bases in Pakistan. In conclusion, continuing to ignore the growth of the PA terror army is a dangerous gamble with the lives of millions of Israelis. The writing is on the wall at a distance of less than 22 kilometers from the heart of the country. The danger is real and highly probable. To prevent a disaster far greater than October 7th massacre, Israel must take initiative and apply the remedy before the next count of victims. Folks, this is very serious. The greatest existential threat to Israel that is, and we have not even begun. I mean, we have begun. They're doing things on the ground, but it's not structurally solving the issue. It's going after this terror cell and that terror cell as though there's these terror cells that are rogue. That's not the problem. The problem is the Palestinian Authority. The problem is that they've been educating for the last 30 plus years. They've been educating an entire population to genocide of Jews. And that's why Hamas is so popular in Judea and Samaria as well. And that's why, and now they have this army, this police force army, all made up of people who've been educated in this genocidal education system, who are now ramping up terror attacks against Israelis. And officially, the Palestinian Authority is our partner. We have a very serious problem. It needs to be solved. And we need to change the way we talk about it, change the way we view it. And right now, things are escalating in that area big time. And we have some rough days ahead in dealing with this problem. So, please share this video. Please tell people about this. The media is not covering it. The media only covers this as settler violence against Palestinians, because that's a narrative. They need that narrative. They need that to justify a lot of their political positions on the world stage. So you're never going to see coverage of attacks against Israelis there. And the situation is not going to be solved anytime soon. And it does not look like it's going to de-escalate. I think we're heading for greater and greater escalation in the Judea and Samaria arena. So pray for a good outcome. And again, please like and share and subscribe and all that good stuff. Thank you very much. God bless.